If you found a child half frozen by the creek, would you leave on the stagecoach or gamble your entire future to stay? The church bell rang 9:30 when Martha Holbrook discovered her father counting money at the kitchen table. Silver dollars caught lamplight in neat stacks, more silver than she'd seen since they'd left Missouri 3 years back. "Stage leaves at noon," Samuel Holbrook said without looking up. His weathered hands moved precise as a telegraph key. "We can catch the afternoon train in Cheyenne." Martha set down her water bucket. Ice crystals melted on the rim, clicking against tin. Outside, snow fell thick as mill flour, and the wind made the cabin walls groan like ship timber. "What about the Brennan place?" she asked. "You said we'd see them through winter." Samuel's hands paused. $47.48. Brennan's got his own troubles. Bank's calling his note, come spring. Through the window, the cottonwoods bent white-heavy toward the creek. Martha had walked that path every morning for water, past the stand of aspens where Mrs. Brennan was buried, past the sod house where Tom Brennan tried to raise 3 children on 20 acres of hard ground. "The marriage paper," Martha said. "Mother always said, 'Your mother's dead.'" Samuel's voice cut sharp as winter wind. "Been dead 2 years, and her notions died with her." He folded the bank draft, $300 drawn on the cattleman's trust, and tucked it inside his vest. "We're taking the noon stage." Martha picked up the empty coal bucket. The stove needed feeding, and the wood box sat near empty. Through the kitchen window, she glimpsed movement by the creek, a splash of blue against the white. At the door, she pulled on her thick wool coat, the one her mother had sewn from Denver cloth. Samuel looked up from his counting. "Where you headed?" "Coal shed." Martha lifted the bucket. "Storm's getting worse. Be quick about it." "Stage won't wait." The wind hit her like a fist when she stepped outside. Snow stung her cheeks and made her squint, but she could still make out the path to the creek. The blue shape was there again, a child, crouched at the water's edge. Martha's boots crunched through snow already ankle-deep. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees since dawn, and the clouds hung low enough to scrape the chimney tops. By the creek, a girl sat on a fallen log, her feet bare in the snow. Maybe 9 or 10 years old, with dark hair plastered to her skull and lips the color of old pewter. Her dress, thin cotton, summer weight, clung to her small frame like wet paper. "Child," Martha called. "Child, what are you doing out here?" The girl looked up with eyes wide as silver dollars. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came out, lost in the wind. Martha dropped the coal bucket and hurried forward. The girl was shaking so hard her teeth clicked like dice in a cup. Martha pulled off her wool coat and wrapped it around the small shoulders. "There now." Martha's breath clouded in the cold air. "Where's your family? Where do you live?" The girl pointed downstream, toward the cluster of sod houses that marked the Brennan homestead. Her lips moved again, but Martha couldn't catch the words. "Can you walk?" Martha asked. The girl nodded and stood on unsteady legs. Martha took her small hand, cold as creek water, and led her toward the cabin. Behind them, the church bell rang 10 o'clock, and the stage road disappeared under fresh snow. Inside, Samuel looked up from his money counting. "What's this now?" "Found her by the creek," Martha said, guiding the girl to the stove. Near, froze to death. Samuel frowned. "That's a Brennan child, Katie or some such. Their youngest." Martha wrapped a blanket around the girl's shoulders and pressed a tin cup of hot coffee into her hands. "Drink slow now. We can't keep her," Samuel said. "Stage leaves in 2 hours. She's half dead from cold." Martha knelt beside the girl, rubbing her feet between her palms. "Look at her no shoes, summer dress. Someone needs to ride to the Brennan place." "In this storm?" Samuel shook his head. "Nothing moving today except fools and desperate men." The girl's lips had begun to pink up near the warmth of the stove. She sipped the coffee and looked around the cabin with eyes that seemed too old for her small face. "What's your name, child?" Martha asked gently. "Katie," the girl whispered. "Katie Brennan. Where's your pa?" "Your brothers?" Katie's face crumpled. "Gone to town." Storm came fast, and I. She pressed her face against the coffee cup. "I fell in the creek trying to get water. Got all wet, and the cold. Samuel stood and walked to the window. The stage road had vanished under white drifts, and the telegraph lines sagged heavy with ice. "Stage won't run in this," he said, more to himself than anyone. Martha looked at Katy, small and shivering despite the blanket and coat. Outside, the wind howled like a locomotive, and snow piled against the windows in white waves. "Then we wait," Martha said. Samuel's jaw tightened. "Every day we stay costs us money. Food. Fuel." He gestured at the stove. "Coal bins near empty. There's enough." Martha stood and moved to the cupboard. "Beans, bacon, flour for biscuits. We'll make do. And when the storm breaks, stage will be running again. But the fare goes up every day we wait." Martha pulled down a tin of beans and set them on the table. Through the window, she could see the creek running black between white banks and the stand of cottonwoods where they'd found Katy, half dead from cold. "We'll manage," she said. Samuel returned to his counting, silver coins clicking against the table. "One day," he said, "storm breaks. We take the first stage out." Katy looked up from her coffee cup. "My pa's coming back," she whispered. "He'll look for me." "Course he will," Martha said, but she remembered the empty sod house, the broken fence, the look in Tom Brennan's eyes the last time she'd seen him like a man carrying more weight than his back could hold. The church bell rang 10:30, and the wind shook the cabin like a dog with a bone. By noon, the storm had worsened. Snow fell so thick Martha couldn't see the creek from the kitchen window, and the temperature had dropped until the water bucket showed skin ice at the edges. Katy sat wrapped in blankets near the stove, color returning to her cheeks. She'd eaten a bowl of beans and drunk 2 cups of coffee, but she still shivered when the wind hit the walls particularly hard. "Tell me about your family," Martha said, settling into the chair beside her. "Your pa and brothers." "Pa farms 20 acres, Katy said. "Billy and Joe help with the plowing. We got 2 cows and some chickens." She looked toward the window. "Had chickens. Storm might have." "They'll be fine," Martha said, though she knew chickens died easy in cold like this. Samuel paced from window to door and back again. Every few minutes, he'd pull out his pocket, watch a railroad timepiece that had belonged to Martha's grandfather, and check the time against the mantel clock. "Stage should have come through by now," he muttered. "Driver knows this route, storm or no storm." "Nobody's traveling in this," Martha said. "Look outside." Through the frosted glass, the world had turned into a white wall. The fence posts had disappeared under drifts, and the barn looked like a snow-covered hill. Katy tugged at Martha's sleeve. "Miss Martha, what's that paper your pa keeps looking at?" Samuel's head snapped up. "Nothing that concerns you, child." Martha glanced at her father, then back at Katy. "It's a bank draft," she said quietly. "Money for train tickets. We going somewhere?" "East," Samuel said before Martha could answer. "Back to Missouri, where people got sense enough not to homestead in God-forsaken country." Katy's eyes went wide. "But what about the Brennan place? Who's going to check on us when Pa's in town?" Samuel turned away from the window. "Tom Brennan's a grown man. He can tend his own. Pa says you've been good neighbors," Katy said. "Says when Ma died, you brought food every day for 2 weeks." Martha felt something twist in her chest. She remembered those days, walking the creek path with baskets of bread and soup, watching Tom Brennan try to manage a farm and 3 children with grief, hanging on him like lead weights. "That was different," Samuel said. "That was Christian duty." "And this isn't?" Martha asked. Samuel's face darkened. "This is business. I got money invested in tickets and arrangements. Every day we sit here costs us dollars we can't spare." The church bell rang 1 o'clock, muffled by snow and wind. Martha stood and moved to the cupboard, pulling down the wooden box where her mother had kept her sewing things. Inside, silver thimble, bone buttons, colored thread, and at the bottom, wrapped in brown paper, her parents' marriage certificate. The paper had yellowed with age, and the ink had faded to sepia, but the words were still clear. Samuel Joshua Holbrook and Elizabeth Rose McKinnon joined in holy matrimony the 15th of June, 1861. "Mother always said this paper meant something more than just names on a page," Martha said, lifting the certificate. Said it was a promise to build something together, to make a home worth keeping. Samuel's jaw tightened. Your mother was a dreamer. Dreams don't pay debts or put food on the table. No, Martha agreed, but they give you reason to try. Katie looked between them with wide eyes. Outside, the wind howled like something wild and hungry, and snow continued to fall. At 2 o'clock, the storm began to ease. The wind dropped from a howl to a steady moan, and Martha could make out the outline of the barn through the thinning snow. Samuel pulled on his boots and heavy coat. I'm riding to the depot, he said. See if there's any word on the afternoon stage. In this weather? Martha asked. Horse'll founder in the drifts. Horse knows the way. Won't be gone more than an hour. Martha watched him saddle the bay mare and lead her into the white world beyond the barn. The snow was still falling, but lighter now, and she could see perhaps 50 yards before everything dissolved into grey-white nothing. Katie moved to the window beside her. He don't want to stay, does he? No, Martha said. He doesn't. What about you? Martha looked out at the storm-changed landscape. The creek ran dark between white banks, and the cottonwoods bent under their load of snow like old men carrying heavy burdens. I don't know, she said. Katie pressed her small hand against the frosted glass. Pa says this country's hard, but it's honest. Says it'll give you what you earn, no more and no less. Your pa's a wise man. Then why's he talking about selling out? Billy heard him and Mr. Carson from the bank. Pa owes money, and if he can't pay come spring. Martha's chest tightened. She'd suspected Tom Brennan was in trouble, had seen it in the way he looked at his fields, the way he counted coins at the general store, but she hadn't known it was that bad. How much does he owe? $150, Katie whispered. Billy says it might as well be 1,000. Martha was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the snow continued to thin, and she could make out the stage road buried under 3 feet of white, but still visible as a depression running east toward Cheyenne. The church bell rang 2:30. At 3 o'clock, Samuel returned with ice in his beard and discouragement in his eyes. No stage today, he said, stamping snow from his boots. Maybe not tomorrow either. Driver says the road's blocked solid between here and Cheyenne. Martha felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. How long? Day or two, if we're lucky. Week if the snow keeps up. Samuel pulled off his coat and hung it on the peg. Either way, we're burning money we can't spare. Katie looked up from her place by the stove. Mr. Samuel? My pa's probably worried sick. Could someone ride to our place? Let him know I'm safe. Samuel considered this. Road to the Brennan place, crosses Miller's Creek twice. Creek'll be running high with snowmelt, and the ice won't hold a horse. I could walk it, Martha said. In this cold? You'd freeze before you made it halfway. Martha moved to the window. The storm had passed, leaving the world transformed. Snow lay in smooth drifts that disguised familiar landmarks, and the sun, low in the winter sky, turned everything gold and pink. Tomorrow morning, she said, if the weather holds. Samuel nodded reluctantly. If it holds. That evening, they ate beans and bacon by lamplight, while wind rattled the windows and the stove ticked with cooling metal. Katie had found Martha's old reader, McGuffey's Fifth Eclectic Reader, and was working through a story about a boy and his dog. The faithful animal seemed to understand that something was wrong. Katie read aloud, and whined softly as he laid his head upon his master's knee. That's very good, Martha said. You read well for your age. Katie's face brightened. Pa taught me. Says reading's the one thing nobody can take away from you, no matter how poor you get. Samuel looked up from his coffee. Fine sentiment. Won't pay the mortgage, though. Pa says some things matter more than money. Your pa's never been truly poor, Samuel replied. Never had to choose between pride and survival. Martha set down her sewing. Haven't we all made that choice? Coming west, starting over, that was different. We came west with hope and a little money. Now we got less hope and less money. Katie closed the reader and looked between them. But you got each other. That's something. Samuel's expression softened slightly. Yes, child. That's something. Outside, the wind had died to whispers, and stars appeared between breaking clouds. The temperature continued to drop. Martha could hear the cabin walls crack as the wood contracted, but the worst of the storm had passed. At 9 o'clock, the church bell rang across the snow-muffled town, and Martha banked the fire for the night. Martha woke before dawn to the sound of splitting wood. Through the bedroom window, she could see Samuel at the woodpile, his breath clouding in the still air as he worked by lantern light. The cabin was cold enough that her water pitcher showed ice at the edges, but Katy slept warm under piled blankets near the stove. The girl's face looked peaceful in the dim light, younger than her years, and innocent of the hardships that seemed to follow frontier families like shadows. Martha dressed quickly and tiptoed to the kitchen. The coffee pot sat cold on the stove, and the fire had burned down to grey ash. She rebuilt it with kindling and small wood, then set water to boil. Through the window, the world sparkled under fresh snow. The storm had left drifts 3 feet deep in places, but the sky was clear and pale blue, promising a cold but sunny day. Samuel came in carrying an armload of split oak, stamping snow from his boots. "Roads are impassable," he said without preamble. Saw Pete Morrison riding in from his place. Took him 3 hours to make 2 miles. Horse was played out. Martha poured coffee into tin cups. "What about the Brennan place?" "Morrison says Tom Brennan rode out yesterday morning before the storm hit. Headed for town with his boys, looking to buy supplies and check on cattle prices. So they don't know Katy's missing." Samuel nodded grimly. "Won't know till they get back, and that might be days if they're snowed in at the hotel." Katy stirred near the stove, then sat up with hair mussed and eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning, Miss Martha." "Mr. Samuel." "Morning, child," Martha said. "Sleep well?" "Yes, ma'am. Warm as summer." Katy looked toward the window. "Storm's done?" "Mostly, but there's 3 feet of snow between here and everywhere else." Katy's face fell. "Pa won't be able to get home, will he?" "He'll try," Martha said gently. "Soon as the roads clear a little." Samuel sat at the table with his coffee. "Morrison says the bank's been asking questions about the Brennan note. Seems Tom's missed 2 payments already." "How do you know this?" "Morrison heard it at Hendrick's store. Bank's got paper on half the homesteads in the county, and they're calling notes early, trying to clean house before spring." Martha felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. They can't just take a man's farm. They can if he can't pay what he owes. Samuel's voice was matter of fact. "Law's the law, whether it's fair or not." Katy looked between them with growing alarm. "What does that mean? About our place?" Martha knelt beside the girl's chair. "It means your pa's got some business to take care of, that's all. Nothing for you to worry about." But Katy's eyes were too knowing for her age. "Pa's gonna lose the farm, isn't he? That's why he went to town." Samuel started to speak, but Martha cut him off with a look. "Your pa's a good man and a hard worker," she said. "He'll find a way, but what if he can't? What happens to us?" Martha had no answer for that. She'd seen too many families pack their possessions into wagon beds and head back east, faces grim with failure and shame. The church bell rang 7 o'clock, and sunlight streamed through the frost-etched windows, turning ice crystals into tiny diamonds. After breakfast, Martha bundled up in her heaviest coat and stepped outside to check the road conditions. The snow was knee-deep in most places, deeper where it had drifted against buildings and fence lines. The air was still and bitter, cold enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground, but the sky was crystalline blue, and the sun cast long purple shadows across the white landscape. At the creek, she found the water running black between ice shelves. The current was swift enough that it hadn't frozen completely, but ice hung like curtains from the banks, and the crossing stones were buried under snow and slush. She was studying the creek, trying to judge if it could be forded safely, when she heard the distant sound of bells. Not the church bell, this was smaller, sharper. Sleigh bells. Through the cottonwoods, she glimpsed a dark shape moving along the stage road. A sleigh, pulled by 2 horses, cutting a furrow through the snow. Martha hurried back toward the cabin, calling over her shoulder. "Samuel! Someone's coming!" The sleigh pulled up in front of the cabin, just as Samuel and Katy emerged. The driver was bundled in furs and wool scarves, but Martha recognized Dr. Hendricks from town. His black medical bag sat beside him on the seat. "Morning, Samuel." Martha. Hendricks climbed down stiffly, favoring his left leg. Heard you might have young Katie Brennan here. How'd you hear that? Samuel asked. Pete Morrison said he saw tracks leading from the creek to your place yesterday. Small boots. Hendricks looked at Katie, who had pressed close to Martha's side. Child, your father's been worried sick. Sent me to fetch you home. Katie's face lit up. Pa's back? Got in this morning, him and your brothers. Been riding the road since dawn, looking for you. Martha felt relief wash through her. Is he at the homestead? No, ma'am. He's in town, at the hotel. Seems there's some business with the bank that couldn't wait. Hendricks' expression darkened. Ugly business. From what I hear, Samuel's jaw tightened. What kind of business? The kind that comes with foreclosure papers and sheriff's notices. Hendricks shook his head. Tom Brennan's a good man, but he's caught in a hard place. Bank wants their money, and he ain't got it to give. Katie's small hand found Martha's. What's foreclosure? Martha squeezed the girl's fingers. It's when the bank takes back something you owe money on, like our farm, like your farm, Hendricks confirmed gently. I'm sorry, child. Your pa asked me to bring you to town so you could say goodbye to the place proper. The words hit Katie like a physical blow. Her face crumpled, and tears started down her cheeks. But where will we go? What about the cows? What about Ma's garden? Martha knelt and pulled the girl into her arms. Hush now, we'll figure something out. But even as she said the words, she knew how hollow they sounded. Tom Brennan owed $150 more money than most homesteaders saw in 2 years of good harvests. Hendricks climbed back onto his sleigh. I'll tell Tom you're coming. Hotel's got room if you need it, but... He shrugged. Might be best to get us settled somewhere more permanent. After the doctor left, cutting fresh tracks through the snow toward town, the cabin fell silent except for the tick of the mantel clock and the soft sound of Katie crying. Samuel stood at the window, looking out at the white expanse of the Brennan homestead. $150, he said quietly. Might as well be 1,000. Martha looked at him sharply. What are you thinking? Samuel reached into his vest pocket and withdrew the bank draft $300, their passage money back to Missouri. The paper crackled between his fingers like autumn leaves. I'm thinking, he said slowly, that sometimes a man has to choose between what he wants and what's right. Katie looked up from Martha's shoulder, tears still wet on her cheeks. Mr. Samuel? Samuel folded the bank draft carefully and tucked it back into his pocket. Get your things together, child. We're going to town. Samuel, Martha said, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. You can't mean... I mean exactly what I said. Samuel's voice was firm. We're going to town. All of us. Together. The church bell rang 9 o'clock as they prepared to leave, and the sun climbed higher in the winter sky, turning snow crystals into fields of scattered diamonds. The sleigh ride to town took 2 hours through snow that lay heavy as flour sacks across the stage road. Samuel had borrowed Dr. Hendricks' sleigh. The doctor was making house calls and wouldn't need it until evening, and the horses were fresh enough to pull through the deepest drifts. Katie sat between Martha and Samuel, wrapped in blankets and still sniffling occasionally. The cold air had turned her cheeks red as winter apples, but her eyes were brighter now, as if hope had begun to replace despair. Tell me about your ma, Martha said as they glided between snow-heavy pines. What was she like? Katie's face softened. She sang while she worked. Irish songs, mostly her ma came from County Cork, and she made the best apple butter west of Missouri. Did she teach you to sing? A little. Pa says I sound like her when I try the high parts. Katie looked up at Martha. Do you sing? Some. Church hymns, mostly. Ma always said singing makes work go easier. Said it's hard to be purely miserable when you got a tune in your head. Samuel guided the horses around a fallen tree branch, the sleigh runners hissing through the snow. Your ma sounds like a wise woman. She was. Used to say the land would provide if we just learned to listen to what it was telling us. Katie pointed toward a stand of bare cottonwoods. She taught me which plants are good for medicine, which berries you can eat, how to read weather signs in the clouds. Martha felt a pang of recognition. Her own mother had possessed similar knowledge, country wisdom passed down through generations of women who made homes in wild places. "That's knowledge worth keeping," she said. "Yes, ma'am. But what good's it going to do if we ain't got land to use it on?" The question hung in the cold air between them like frost crystals. As they crested the hill overlooking town, Martha could see smoke rising from a dozen chimneys and the depot platform cleared of snow. The afternoon train would be coming through the same train that could carry them back to Missouri if Samuel chose to use the tickets. The hotel sat on Main Street between the general store and the bank, a two-story frame building with green shutters and a wide front porch. Samuel pulled the sleigh up to the hitching rail, and they climbed down on legs stiff from the cold ride. Inside, the lobby was warm and smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Tom Brennan sat in a leather chair by the window, his hat in his hands and his face grey as old ashes. When he saw Katie, his whole body seemed to come alive. He stood and swept her into his arms, holding her tight while she buried her face against his neck. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God you're safe. I fell in the creek, Pa. Got all wet and cold, but Miss Martha and Mr. Samuel took me in." Tom looked over Katie's head at Martha and Samuel. His eyes were red-rimmed with worry and exhaustion. "I can't thank you enough," he said. "When we got back and found her gone—" "She's a good child," Martha said. "No trouble at all." Tom's face darkened. "More trouble than you know. Banks called my note. Sheriff serving papers tomorrow morning. How much time do you have?" Samuel asked. 30 days to settle the debt or vacate the property." Tom's voice was hollow. $150 I don't have and can't raise." Katie pulled back to look at her father's face. "Pa? Are we really going to lose the farm?" Tom's jaw worked for a moment before he could speak. "Yes, honey, I'm afraid we are. But where will we go? I got a letter from your Aunt Sarah in Kansas City. She says we can stay with her till I find work." Tom's voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry, Katie. I tried everything I could think of." Martha watched the exchange with her heart breaking. She'd seen this scene too many times, good people crushed by circumstances beyond their control, families torn apart by debt and failed dreams. Samuel cleared his throat. "Tom, walk with me a minute." The two men stepped outside onto the hotel porch, leaving Martha and Katie alone in the lobby. Through the window, Martha could see them talking in low voices, Samuel gesturing with his hands, while Tom shook his head repeatedly. "Miss Martha?" Katie's voice was small. "What's going to happen to the cows? And the chickens?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Bank's just going to let them starve." Martha had no answer for that either. She'd seen abandoned homesteads where livestock had died of neglect, where crops had gone to seed while bank agents tried to find buyers for properties nobody wanted. After several minutes, Samuel and Tom returned. Tom's face was strange, hopeful, and frightened at the same time. "Katie," Tom said, "Mr. Samuel's made us an offer." The girl looked up expectantly. "What kind of offer?" Samuel pulled the bank draft from his pocket and set it on the lobby table. The paper caught lamplight from the brass fixture overhead. "This is our passage money," he said quietly. $300. More than enough to pay your pa's debt and give you a fresh start. Katie's eyes went wide. "But that's your money. For tickets back to Missouri." "Yes, it island. Then you'd be stuck here. Same as us." Samuel looked at Martha, and she saw something in his expression she hadn't seen since her mother died, a kind of peace, as if he'd finally found solid ground after years of drifting. "Maybe being stuck here isn't the worst thing that could happen," he said. Tom shook his head. "Samuel, I can't let you do this. It's too much. Tom, you helped me build my barn when I first came west. Saturday up 3 nights running when Martha had the fever. Brought us food when Elizabeth died." Samuel's voice was steady. "Neighbors help neighbors. That's how it works out here. But your plans going back east, plans change." Samuel looked at Martha. "Don't they?" Martha felt tears prick her eyes. She thought of her mother's marriage certificate, of the promises people make to each other, of the kind of home that's built on more than just hope and stubbornness. "Yes," she said softly. "Plans change." Katie threw her arms around Samuel's waist, hugging him tight. "Thank you, Mr. Samuel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." Samuel's weathered face softened as he patted the girl's head. "You're welcome, child. Just promise me you'll take good care of that land." I promise. Cross my heart and hope to spit. Hope to die. Martha corrected gently. No, ma'am. Hope to spit. Ma always said hoping to die was bad luck. Through the hotel window, Martha could see the afternoon train pulling into the depot, black smoke rising against the pale winter sky. Passengers were boarding people heading east to lives they'd left behind, or west to dreams they hadn't yet found. But she felt no urge to join them. Here, in this warm lobby, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stay and fight for something better, she'd found what she'd been looking for without knowing it. The church bell rang 4 o'clock, and outside, snow began to fall again, light flakes that caught the window light like blessing. 3 months later, Martha stood in the Brennan kitchen watching Katie practice her letters at the table. Spring had come early, melting the snow and turning the creek into a silver ribbon that sang between green banks. Through the window, she could see Samuel and Tom working in the south field, preparing ground for corn planting. The two men had become partners of sorts, Samuel's experience with farming and Tom's knowledge of the local conditions making them more effective together than either had been alone. Miss Martha? Katie held up her slate. How do you spell gratitude? Martha smiled and guided the girl's hand through the letters. Gratitude. That's a big word for someone your age. It's for my composition. Teacher says we should write about something important that happened to us. And you chose gratitude? Katie nodded seriously. Ma always said being grateful was like putting money in the bank. The more you saved up, the richer you felt inside. Martha looked out at the fields again, where spring wildflowers were beginning to show color between the furrows. The bank draft was long spent, Tom's debt paid, new seed purchased, repairs made to the barn and fences, but the investment had paid dividends she couldn't have imagined. Samuel appeared in the kitchen doorway, his boots muddy from fieldwork. Ladies, he said with a formal nod that made Katie giggle. Pa says you're staying for supper, Katie announced, and that you're going to read us another chapter from that book, if that's all right with Miss Martha. Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the winter months, Samuel had taken to joining the Brennan family for evening meals, and afterward he'd read aloud from whatever book Katie had brought home from school. It had become a cherished routine, the four of them gathered around the lamplit table, while Samuel's voice brought stories to life. Of course it's all right, she said. Samuel's eyes warmed. Good. Tom's bringing in the last of the fence posts, and then we'll be ready to eat. After he left, Katie looked up from her slate with knowing eyes. Miss Martha, are you and Mr. Samuel going to get married? Martha nearly dropped the plate she was holding. Katie, what a thing to ask. Well, are you? Pa thinks you should. Says you're good together, like his ma and pa were. Martha busied herself at the stove, stirring a pot of beans that didn't need stirring. Your pa talks too much. He says Mr. Samuel looks at you the way a man looks at something precious, and you look at him like you're trying to solve a puzzle. I do not, Katie grinned. Do too. I seen it lots of times. Through the window, Martha watched Samuel and Tom walking toward the house, their voices carrying on the evening air. Samuel had his sleeves rolled up, and there was dirt under his fingernails, honest dirt from honest work. He's a good man, Martha said quietly. The best, Katie agreed. So are you going to marry him or not? Before Martha could answer, the men came through the door, bringing the smell of fresh earth and spring air. Tom hung his hat on the peg and rolled down his sleeves. Corn ground's ready, he announced. Should be able to plant next week if the weather holds. Good. Martha ladled beans into bowls and set them on the table. Katie, wash your hands. As they sat down to eat, Samuel cleared his throat. Tom and I've been talking about expanding the operation, maybe adding some cattle come fall. Cattle take money, Martha said. Some. But the bank's been more reasonable since we paid off the note. Might be willing to extend credit for the right investment. Tom nodded. Land's good for grazing. Could run maybe 20 head on the back 40. Katie looked up from her beans. Could I have a calf to raise? Like Sarah Henderson's got? Maybe, Tom said. If you keep up with your schoolwork and your chores. I will, Pa. I promise. After supper, they gathered around the table as Samuel opened the book, Treasure Island, which Katie had chosen from the school library. His voice was deep and steady as he read about young Jim Hawkins and pirates and buried gold. Martha found herself watching his hands as he turned the pages, strong hands, calloused from work, but gentle when he held the book. She thought about Katie's question, about the way Samuel looked at her, about the life they might build together if they were brave enough to try. When the chapter ended, Katie yawned widely. "Time for bed, little one," Tom said. "But I want to know what happens next." "Tomorrow night," Samuel promised. "If you're good for your pa." After Katie had been tucked into bed, the three adults sat around the table with coffee and the comfortable silence of people who'd shared work and worry and hope. "Martha," Samuel said finally, "walk with me?" They stepped outside into the cool spring evening. Stars were beginning to show in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. "It's been a good winter," Samuel said. "Yes. Hard, but good." They walked toward the creek, where cottonwoods showed the first green buds of spring. The water ran clear and shallow, singing over stones. "I've been thinking," Samuel said, "about what we talked about back in January, about plans changing." Martha's heart began to beat faster. "What about them?" Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her. In the starlight, his weathered face looked younger somehow, hopeful, in a way she hadn't seen since before her mother died. "I'd like to make some new plans," he said. "With you, if you'd be willing." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "What kind of plans?" Instead of answering with words, Samuel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. In the starlight, Martha could see it was a ring, simple gold, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's," he said. "Been carrying it around for 20 years, waiting for the right moment, the right woman." Martha's breath caught. "Samuel, I know I'm not much of a catch. Old, set in my ways, not much money to speak of. But I love you, Martha. Have for years, if I'm honest. And I hope you might feel the same." Martha looked at the ring, then at Samuel's face. She thought about her mother's marriage certificate, about promises made and kept, about the kind of love that grows stronger through shared hardship. "Yes," she whispered, "I do feel the same." Samuel's face broke into a grin wider than any she'd ever seen. "Then you'll marry me?" "Yes, Samuel, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been waiting all these years just for her. Then he kissed her, gentle and sure, while the creek sang its ancient song and the stars wheeled overhead. When they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, they found Tom sitting on the porch with a knowing smile. "Took you long enough," he said. "You knew?" Martha asked. "Child, the whole county knew. Question was whether you two would figure it out." Through the window, they could see Katie's face pressed against the glass, grinning like Christmas morning. "Little eavesdropper," Martha said fondly. "She's been hoping for this since January," Tom said. "Keeps asking when she's going to get a new ma." Martha felt warmth spread through her chest. A new ma. She liked the sound of that. The church bell rang 9 o'clock across the still night air, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed the evening freight, heading east with a cargo of dreams deferred and new beginnings. But Martha felt no urge to follow that lonesome sound. Here, on this porch, surrounded by the people who'd become her chosen family, she'd found everything she'd been searching for. The following morning, Martha woke in her own bed at the cabin she'd shared with Samuel, but for the last time. Tonight, she'd sleep at the Brennan place, and tomorrow they'd begin making arrangements for a wedding. Samuel was already up, making coffee, and actually humming as he worked. Martha had never heard him hum before. "Morning, bride-to-be," he said with a grin. "Morning yourself." She looked around the cabin, the place where she'd grieved her mother's death, where she'd found Katie half frozen by the creek, where she'd watched Samuel count passage money and make the hardest decision of his life. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked. "About that day in January, when you chose to help Tom instead of buying our tickets." Samuel poured coffee into her cup. "Best decision I ever made. Even better than proposing." "Well," he said, settling into the chair beside her, "that was the second best decision." Through the window, Martha could see the path to the creek, where early wildflowers were beginning to bloom among the new grass. Soon, that path would lead not just to water, but to home, the home she'd help Katie and Tom rebuild, the home she'd share with Samuel, the home they'd create together from scratch and stubbornness and love. The church bell rang 7 o'clock, and a meadowlark called from the fence post, welcoming the new day with liquid song. Martha reached across the table and took Samuel's work-roughened hand in hers. His mother's ring caught the morning light, simple gold made precious by the promises it carried. "No regrets?" she asked. Samuel brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. None at all. Outside, spring was coming to the high country green grass, pushing through winter's remnants, buds swelling on the cottonwoods, ice breaking up in the creek to make room for rushing water. And inside, two people who'd learned that the best journeys sometimes require staying exactly where you are, planned a future built on the solid ground of here and now. The coffee was strong and hot, the morning light was golden on the kitchen table, and somewhere in the distance, Katie's laughter carried on the wind like a blessing. If you'd like more stories like this, stay a while, I'll tell the next one tomorrow night.